Janessa here from the blog almostheavenhomesteading.com. I am back out in the garden today getting ready to bring in a harvest of tomatoes so that I can show you how to water bath and tomato juice. This is something that I love to keep stocked on our shelves for tomato sauces and pizza sauces and soups in the winter time. It's perfect to have on hand, and so I love growing quite a bounty of tomatoes so that I can put up quite a bit of that each year. I've been gathering tomatoes over the last week or so, and they've just been ripening at their leisure, but I'm going to go ahead and grab as many more as are ripened right now so that I can make as much tomato sauce at once as I possibly can. So let's get these tomatoes harvested so that I can show you how to make this delicious canned tomato juice. I got a few more tomatoes to add to my pile of ripening tomatoes already inside. My tomatoes never come ripe all at once. I'll get 10 or 15 at a time and then 10 or 15 more a couple days later. But the great thing about tomatoes is they will last on your counter for several days and they'll just continue to ripen until you're ready to use them. And that's what I'm ready to do. So let's go add these to the ones inside and get started making this tomato juice. Alright, so like I mentioned in the video on canning green beans, the first step with any canning project is to thoroughly wash your mason jars and your rings. So that's what I'm doing here. I have a sink of hot soapy water and I'm getting those jars and rings nice and clean and setting them aside. I'll be sterilizing them later, but this is the first step. After that, I'll be draining that soapy water and filling the sink with nice cool water to wash the tomatoes. I'm going to wash these several times in cool water or just rinse them under the cool water, either one. I'll pick those stems off, swish them around really well to get rid of any dirt and debris, and just set those aside as well. Once those tomatoes are all washed, we're going to start cutting them up to make it a little easier on the blender in blending those tomatoes, and also removing the little part where the stem was growing. I like to do this by just cutting the tomato in an uneven half and then just removing a little piece where the stem was from the bigger half. Just removing as little of the tomato as possible so that you get as much tomato juice as possible. So just go ahead and do that with all of your tomatoes, and also remove any blemishes on the tomatoes or any bad spots. Of course, you don't want to blend those up into your tomato juice. And if you are not using Roma tomatoes, by the way, you can use any type of tomato that you like. The flavor will be a little different, so just use a type of tomato that you like the flavor of for your tomato juice. That way you actually like the flavor of your tomato juice. But anyway, the Roma tomatoes is what I love to use, but if you're using a different type, you may want to cut them in more than just 2 pieces just to make that a little easier on your blender. So go ahead and just add all of those pieces and turn the blender on high and let that blend for a couple minutes so that everything is nice and pureed. And after that, go ahead and just add it to a large stock pot. You'll probably need to do this in several batches if you have enough tomatoes anyway. I think I had at least 3 batches in the blender, and then I just emptied it out into the stock pot each time. So just continue until all of your tomatoes are done, and then we'll move on from there. Okay, so this is the next day. I actually didn't get to finish this process that day when I was blending those tomatoes, but that's okay. I just got them all blended and put them in the fridge. So I'm finishing this today, and I went ahead and got the tomatoes on the stove and turned those on medium heat to get those cooking. And then I filled my water bath canner about 2/3 of the way. You may need to fill your water bath canner less or more depending on how many jars you think you're going to get, but go ahead and just fill it as much as you think you'll need to be able to cover all of your jars. If you need to add more or take some away, that's okay, but go ahead and just use your best judgment starting off. So get those tomatoes over medium heat, like I said, and get those cooking on the stove. What we want is for the foam to all boil away and for the tomato juice to be a little more transparent and not quite so cloudy looking. And I would say that probably takes a good 25-30 minutes depending on how many tomatoes you actually have. I also have a tea kettle of water going so that I can sterilize my mason jars. That's a really important step whenever you're canning. And I also got a little saucepan of water simmering so that I can sterilize the lids. Once again, being very clean and sterile is always very important when you're canning. So fill those mason jars about halfway with that really hot boiling water and let those set until you're ready to fill them. And I also forgot to mention, while you're doing all of this, sterilizing your jars, your lids, boiling your tomatoes, filling your jars, you should have your water bath canner over high heat so that it's starting to boil, and it will take a while for all of that water to come to a boil. Alright, so moving on to filling the jars, the tomato juice has boiled until that foam is gone, which is what we're looking for, and we're ready to start filling the jars. So take one at a time and pour out that boiling water and put a half a teaspoon of good quality salt in the bottom of your jar. And then start just scooping in the tomato juice until you have about 1/4 inch of space left at the top of the jar before it starts to narrow. Go ahead and just repeat that with all of your other jars. And then we'll be, of course, screwing the lids and the rings on and getting these into our water bath canner. So let's go ahead and get these filled, and then we'll move on from there. Alright, so I'm moving on to filling my last jar. They all received that half teaspoon of salt and tomato juice almost up to the brim, and we're going to go ahead and add the lids and the rings. I'm going ahead and adding those lids to that simmering pot of water just to get those sterilized, and then I'm wiping the rims of my mason jars just in case any tomato debris or salt or anything got on those rims, because that would obstruct it from obtaining a good seal, which is of course what you want so that this tomato juice has a really long shelf life. So go ahead and just use a clean part of the cloth with each jar and dampen it in that hot water and wipe the rims. Then go ahead and really carefully place your lid on the mason jar. Try not to touch the seal part, just the outer edges, and then screw on that lid very carefully as well, trying not to move that lid around too much. Repeat that with the rest of them, and then we're going to be adding them to the water bath canner, which at this point should be boiling. We have that over high heat, and hopefully our water is boiling at this point. So at this point you just want to transfer those jars to your water bath canner. It is hopefully boiling, and just be really careful when you do this part. Use your mason jar lifter and carefully set those down into that water bath canner, and then we'll just put the lid back on. Of course, make sure that the water is covering those jars. If you need to add a little bit more, that's okay. You can do that. You'll just want to start timing after it's boiling again. So I did end up and have to add a little bit more water to mine, so I just got my jars in there, added enough water to cover them, and then put the lid back on my water bath canner and waited until I could tell it was at a full boil to start timing. Once it is at a full boil, you will want to go ahead and start timing for 40 minutes if you did quarts and 35 minutes if you did pints. And also, just a little side note, if you did pints, you'll want to do a 1/4 teaspoon of salt, not a half. So go ahead and process those for the 35 or 40 minutes, and then we'll jump back in. So the 40 minutes is up. I'm just going to turn the heat off and remove the lid. And I'm going to very carefully remove these jars and set them on a dry towel. That's actually a really crucial step when you're canning. You really want to make sure that when you remove those really hot jars that you're setting them on just a dry towel. If it is wet and if it's gotten cold in any way, that can actually bust your jar because it's so hot, and then the shock of being set on a cold, wet towel could actually cause the jar to bust. So always make sure that you're setting these on a dry towel, whatever you're canning. So go ahead and just remove those, set those on the towel, and double check to make sure that they are all sealed. They should be sealed at this point, but of course just double check that the lid has popped down and that seal is all nice and tight. And these are done. These are ready to go in your winter soups and stews, and I promise you they will be such a great addition to all of your winter soups or pasta sauces, pizza sauces, anything like that. I love using this tomato juice for so many different things. So I hope you all enjoyed this video. If you did, be sure to give it a like, and we would so appreciate if you would decide to subscribe to our channel. We make a video every single week here on wholesome, self-sufficient, and handcrafted living, so I hope you'll become a regular friend here at Almost Heaven Homesteading. See you all next week.